There's a dream I feel so rare, so real, and the world in union, the world as one, gathering together, one world, one hell, every creed, every color, once joined, never apart, searching for the best in me. I will fight what I can beat. If I win, lose, or draw, there's a winner in us all. It's the world in union, the world as one, as we climb to reach our destiny. A new age has begun. We must face high mountains, must cross rough seas. We must take our place in history and live with dignity. It's our world in union, all divided one, as we climb to reach our destiny. A new age has begun.
Hello everyone! Welcome to Ceva Asia Poultry webinar. My name is Marcelo Paniago and I will be your host during this event. Well, I would like to start this broadcast by thanking you for having accepted our invitation. And I do hope that you're going to enjoy what we have specially prepared for you. As you know, there will be two presentations today. The first one, dealing with the impact of COVID-19 on the poultry industry, will be given by Mr. Justin Gerhard. The second presentation, done by Dr. Christophe Casaban, will deal with some important points of disease prevention. After these two presentations, there will be a Q&A session, and you can take part of it if you want. Just click at the icon on the right-hand side of your screen, type your question, and at the end of this webinar, the presenters will answer to it. But before starting the webinar, I would like to invite Mr. Ruud Arts, Zone Director of Ceva Animal Health Asia, to say a few words. Mr. Ruud, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruud Arts. I'm the Ceva Asia Zone Director. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Ceva webinar. It's the first of its kind for Ceva Asia. I would have loved to welcome you at one of our summits that we are used to hold on an annual basis. But as we are in these very difficult times that the whole world is in, we have to revert to other means of communication like this webinar. But we think it's important that we continue to be in touch with each other and that we continue to exchange information with each other. So hence we have organized this webinar. Very pleased that you have found the time to be with us today. As we know, the whole world is in a very challenging point in its time. Today we are facing a truly global pandemic that so far has affected 210 countries in the world. More than 3 million people to date have been affected by the virus as far as we know, and unfortunately over 200,000 people in the world have passed away as a result of a coronavirus infection. So this is a tragedy in itself. but furthermore, of course, the global economy is very much affected as well. Latest estimates predict that the economy will contract by 2.6% on an annual basis this year. And that is still a relatively optimistic scenario that we are going to be able to come down out of this lockdown situation in the second half of the year. So let's hope those predictions are true. There's a lot of uncertainty at this point in time, as we know, although we can be a little bit optimistic as certain countries already are coming out of the situation, like China, for example, where the country is coming slowly out of this lockdown situation. So we are all somewhat affected, and this is also true, of course, for the poultry industry around the world. Consumption, of course, is very much affected by the effect of the crisis on disposable income of people. The restaurant sector is down very much. Trade is down. Tourism is down. So there's a lot of uncertainty that has an effect on the consumption and therefore the production of poultry meat and eggs as well, by the way. Justin Sherrard of Rabobank is going to share his views about this in a minute. We are very happy to have him with us on this webinar. But furthermore, there's a lot of operational issues as well. There is the issue of workers in the plants, in the hatcheries, on the farms. And there's all the logistic issues as well that place a burden on the poultry industry. So the volatility will be there for quite a while. Hopefully, as I said, the second half of the year, the situation is going to look a bit better. Not all at the same time, but certain countries hopefully are going to see a return back to a kind of normal by that time. Of course, the crisis also has some effect on our business as well, but I'm very happy to tell you that our plants around the world have been able to operate as more or less as normal, and we are able to continue to ship, to distribute our products around the world. So our inventories of our Ceva animal health products around the world is still very good and very solid. And also our research and development activities also continue around the world. And well, our teams in the world, of course, are very much constrained in the way we work, but also we try our best to continue to serve you and to be at least in contact with you as good as we can, to be able to continue to serve your needs. So once again, welcome to this webinar. I hope that you will have an interesting afternoon with us. It's definitely the first, but hopefully not the last webinar of its kind. So I wish you happy viewing, and of course, stay healthy, stay safe, and look forward to see you very soon in real life in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wood, for these words. Well, now I would like to proceed with our seminar by introducing the first speaker, Mr. Justin Sherrard. Please allow me to read his resume. Well, Mr. Sherrard is a global strategist for animal protein, working with Rabobank in the Netherlands since 2009. In this capacity, he is responsible for the analysis of issues of strategic importance to animal protein companies around the world. To make this introduction short, Mr. Sherrard has over 20 years of global experience, having worked in Europe, in the United States, Latin America, New Zealand, as well as his native Australia. Today, Mr. Sherrard will share with us some relevant information on the impact of COVID-19 on the poultry industry, and most importantly, the lessons that we can take from it. Mr. Sherrard, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, great to be with you. Thanks for that introduction. I want to talk to you today about coronavirus and global poultry in Asia in particular, and what I would call a great shake-up. We're really seeing lots of issues, lots of impacts, and I think we're starting to see a few areas where there might be some learnings as well. Let's jump straight into the slides. I want to start by talking here about what we see as the major theme in global markets right now, and poultry markets in particular, and that is uncertainty. We see three main areas of uncertainty as we look at the situation in markets at the moment, and mainly in Asia in particular. The first is supply chain disruptions. We really start to see issues about the operation of supply chains in various parts of the world, and Asia is no exception here. The second area that we see is what I call channel shifting. We've got some parts of the economy open and working very well, that's retail. Food service, on the other hand, is not working very well at all. So this is the second area of uncertainty, channel shifting. What's happening at the downstream end of supply chains? The third area of uncertainty that I want to talk about is the economic downturn. Whether we're in an economic downturn right now, or whether we're going into an economic downturn, a little bit of question of perspective there, but in any case, this is the third area of uncertainty. What will the economic downturn look like? How long will it last? And how bumpy or smooth will the recovery be? When we started thinking about these areas of uncertainty, these first two, supply chain disruptions and channel shifting, really looked like they were going to be issues for the first and maybe the second quarter of this year. But we can already see, as we look around the world, that these issues are relevant into Q3 of 2020 as well. The economic downturn, well, we know that's with us now already in some parts of the world and is bearing down on us in the rest of the world. And this is an issue which is going to be with us well into 2021. I want to drill down now into these three areas of uncertainty and explore a little bit more what they mean in poultry markets. So let's start with the first one, and that is the supply chain disruptions. And let me take you around the world in terms of broiler production and some of the changes that we already see happening and the way that we're adjusting our views on production, poultry production, broiler production in 2020. It doesn't really matter where you are in the world. Production is going to be down on expectations for 2020 in almost every market. It doesn't mean a decline of production per se, just a decline relative to where our expectations had been pegged at the beginning of this year before coronavirus was even on our radar. If we look over in the US, the issues right now are really about processing capacity and constraints on that capacity, and maybe some demand upside because the other species, the other protein species, seem to be hit more in a bigger way, in a more challenging way right now, which could be good news for poultry in the balance of the year. If we look in Brazil, on the other hand, the major issue right now is the currency impact on feed grain prices and how that could impact production intentions through the balance of this year, and also some uncertainty around exports. We've seen some soft export numbers out of Brazil in the first part of this year. Here in Europe, where I'm based, actually the major issue that we're grappling with, and we have been for a couple of years now, is overproduction. Overproduction issues mainly about ramping up production capacity in the eastern parts of Europe and flat production, although not such great demand in other parts of Europe, and how we're rebalancing that market, especially in the context of avian influenza, which is shutting down some export opportunities or has shut down some export opportunities in the first part of this year. Production is going to slow here in Europe, but it's still going to be up on last year, just not as much as we thought. In China, where coronavirus was first felt in the first quarter of this year, we will see strong production growth of broilers in 2020. We think it could be around about a 10% gain year on year. That's down a little bit on our expectations, but still we've seen a very strong first quarter in official data in China, and that does give us some confidence that we will see that momentum continuing through the year. We also, of course, have African swine fever in China, which continues to complicate the market there. The impact of coronavirus will be to delay the rebuilding process for pork, and that means delaying the time at which we see more pork flowing into the local market from local production. In Southeast Asia, it's a much more varied story, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment, but we've got on the one hand impacts from African swine fever, principally in Vietnam and the Philippines at the moment. And on the other hand, we actually see quite some impact from the shutdown, the slowdown, or the disappearance of tourism as well. Let's turn to that picture for Southeast Asia and go through what's happening here by the major countries, at least, in a little bit more detail. In Thailand, production we see down about 6% year on year this year. Significant impacts in Thailand associated with tourism and the slowdown, shutdown, disappearance of tourism, at least in the first part of this year. In Vietnam, a complicated story because of tourism on the one hand and African swine fever on the other hand. But really it's African swine fever which is still having the major impact on markets there. We see poultry broiler production up 4% this year, but that's largely about replacing pork production. In Malaysia, production's going to be down by about 4%. Food service, shutdown in food service is really the main issue there. The Philippines, a little bit like Vietnam, African swine fever and tourism. Overall, we see production down 3%, and it's really the issues about reduction in pork availability, local production, which are going to help to push production up by more than it might otherwise be. And in Indonesia, we've got overcapacity, we've got food service issues and tourism issues. Overall, we see poultry production, broiler production, down 2% year on year. So that rounds out the story for production and production expectations. But as we move on and I turn to the next slide that I have and talk about another area of supply chain disruption, and that is trade. With trade, we are seeing a global slowdown. The chart I'm showing you here is from the World Trade Organization, and it charts what happens with general merchandise trade, not poultry, not animal protein, not even food and agri, but general pattern of merchandise trade around the world. You can see the prominent decline in merchandise trade back in 2009 associated with the global financial crisis. That was a 13% year-on-year decline in general merchandise trade back in 2009. The World Trade Organization's expectations for 2020 are somewhere between a 13% decline and a 32% decline in general merchandise trade this year, with a strong recovery next year, but there's a long way to recover if trade is down by as much as a third as it is in the pessimistic scenario of the World Trade Organization. If we see trade disrupted like that, we start to see changes in the movement of boats, changes in the availability of cargo space to move animal protein products around the world, whether that's frozen meat in imports, whether that's breeding stock, live animals. In all cases, we see a slowdown in the availability of capacity there, and that will have knock-on effects into animal protein. So let's move on now to the second area of disruption that I referred to, and this is what I call channel shifting. The chart I'm showing you here, the slide I'm showing you here, slide number 6, shows the balance between sales of poultry through food retail and food service. Here I'm showing you data from North America and from Western Europe, just to give you an idea on how different this balance can be between retail and food service in different markets. In the US, for fresh poultry, the top left chart, you can see a strong role for food service. 60% of sales of fresh poultry are through food service. In Western Europe, on the other hand, that number is more than reversed. We've got 80% of sales through food retail. So a very different picture there for fresh poultry. In the case of processed poultry, we see a similar pattern, more food service in both markets, but principally more in the US. If I turn then to Southeast Asia and generalise the figures in Southeast Asia, on the left-hand side here of slide 7, what you can see is that we've got about 2/3 of total broiler sales in poultry meat through food retail and 1/3 through food service. On the right-hand side, the chart here I'm showing fresh poultry, where the balance is more 60-40. 60% retail, 40% food service. So as we think about what's going on in markets at the moment, as we're aware of the changes around us, This is the extent to which we need to redirect, repackage, reprocess, repurpose product destined for food service markets and get it into food retail markets if we are going to return markets, poultry markets, to some balance. It is a significant undertaking in most parts of Asia, where a lot of broiler consumption, chicken consumption, takes place in food service. Whether we're talking about informal street cafes or whether we're talking about resorts and tourism, hotels, that sort of related consumption, or whether we're talking about fine dining and everything in between, roadside cafes. Chicken is a staple on those food service menus. And so finding another outlet for that to take it up, a similar sort of demand in food retail, is going to be challenging for the whole, right across the market. Let's turn now to the third area of disruption that I referred to, and that is about the recovery and economic growth out into the next year, the rest of this year and the next year. This slide here, slide number 8, I'm showing you Rabobank's forecasts of GDP for a range of countries and regions in 2020 and 2021. And if you focus on the chart on the top left, world expectations, you'll see that the data that was recorded for 2019 was 2.9% growth in global GDP. Our expectations for global GDP in 2020 are a decline of 1.6%. So a significant decline on last year, followed by a very strong rebound to 5.3% in 2021. Different regions, you have different numbers, but the pattern is the same. A very sharp change in GDP in 2020 and a very strong rebound in 2021. The point I want to emphasise here is that while the collapse of economic growth, especially in the second quarter of 2020, is clear to most of us, there is a lot of uncertainty, many assumptions that have to be made about how economic growth will rebound in 2021. It is unlikely to be a smooth or even a V-shaped pattern as we show here, much more likely to see lots of ups and downs as we come to recalibrate the world economy and we fit animal protein, pork, poultry, beef and seafood back into those changed market circumstances. But these numbers here, wherever you are in the world, these numbers here should give us reason to pause and reason to think about how are we going to change our business model to suit the changed economic circumstances. We should take heart, though, from what happened more than 10 years ago in the global financial crisis. I've got two charts here which show you what happened in the global financial crisis. The top chart on slide 9 is showing GDP growth. And I'm showing here China, Brazil, the US and Europe. And with the exception of China, you can see a downturn in global economic growth 2008 and 2009. Less pronounced in China, more pronounced in the US and in Europe. And you see at the right-hand end of that top chart the way that growth is being pulled down in 2020 and the forecast for that to rebound quite strongly in 2021. So now let's take our gaze down to the bottom chart, and here I've got the total animal protein consumption, except for seafood, and what happens and how that changes over time. And here you will see a very different picture. Yes, you see a certain amount of decline associated with the global financial crisis and that simultaneous contraction of GDP back in 2008 and 2009. But as you look at the data there, all you can conclude is that there are many other factors that are more important in driving consumption choices than what's happening with GDP. What I would say, though, before we move on from this chart, and I think it's an important point, and it's this: consumption value, the prices that consumers pay, are willing to pay, are able to pay, this will change, it will have to change. We cannot expect consumers to keep consuming the same way at the same price point during an economic downturn. And price tends to be the valve that allows us to find a new level in global animal protein markets. So we may not expect a volume change of any great significance associated with the current forecast for an economic downturn, but we should expect changes in the value of consumption. So I want to flick forward now and talk about the recovery, talk about how we're coming out of this period of uncertainty. And the first thing I want to do is emphasise the three things that I'm watching most closely as I'm assessing the economic outlook for the rest of this year and into 2021. The economic outlook and the outlook for animal protein, and in particular poultry. The first, worker absences at plants. It really doesn't matter where you are in the world. Most of the processing plants are currently on reduced capacity. And in a way, this is hurting everyone involved in production. They're all suffering to a certain extent, maybe a bit more here, a bit less there, but most of them are suffering, maybe not because they can't get their product into a plant, but maybe because of the uncertainty that's created around how the future will unfold. It's possible in some markets we'll see material reductions in production because of this reduced capacity. The second area that I'm looking at are the potential disruptions to trade flows. I talked about these before. There are many, many factors at play, all of them creating uncertainty in the market, whether it's about changes in currency, whether it's about the operation of ports, or whether more significantly it's about changes in shipping frequency and the capacity available for frozen meat trade flows. Material changes in trade flows will create opportunities and will create threats, will create winners and will create losers. Those who are able to respond and respond quickly, and those who are left wondering what to do. So disruptions to trade flows to me is the second issue that I'm looking as I calibrate the outlook over the coming months and years. And the third thing, I touched on it just before, is the shape of the economic recovery. Are we going to see a smooth transition out of this downturn in Q2, Q3 and into quite a strong rebound and growth through the back part of this year and next year? Unfortunately, I doubt it. There are too many areas of uncertainty, too many unknowns, too many things that we need to be aware of, too many things that aren't really harmonised in different parts of the world. So a slower recovery, consumer confidence at low levels, business confidence at low levels, this is much more likely to be the sort of pattern that we see over the coming months. And as a result, we should be ready for shocks, ready for uncertainty, and thinking about building resilience into our supply chains, into our operations. Let me finish then with a couple of thoughts, initial thoughts on the areas of change, structural change that I can see emerging in poultry supply chains as we come out of the COVID-19 world. I've identified a few issues here, and really, for me, the most important message is this. Whatever the things that you're talking about, whatever the things that you're hearing, whether it's about local supply, whether it's about online, whether it's about digitalisation, whether it's about the end of cheap international freight, whether it's about automation in processing, whether it's about uncertainty, whether it's about consumers shifting their consumption patterns, all roads to me lead to one issue, and that is trust. How do we maintain the trust that we've worked hard to build with consumers, that we've worked hard to build with our partners along the supply chain? How do we maintain trust? How do we build more trust all the way along supply chains down to consumers so that we can continue to operate safely, continue to operate profitably, and continue to operate with confidence? I invite you all to think about this issue of trust, especially between supply chain partners and all the way down the chain towards consumers. I think this issue is so important to us as a whole industry as we think about the recovery process that's now underway. This provides us, this shock, this disruption provides us with an important opportunity to contemplate how we build, maintain, and embrace the trust that consumers have shown us in the past in the face of an uncertain world. Thank you. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Mr. Shahar, for this very interesting presentation. Indeed, it's very important to understand the impact of COVID-19, not only on the poultry industry, but on the global economy. Well, now I would like to show you a short movie entitled See Our Future. This is an important reminder that malnourishment is still an acute problem that affects millions of children in Asia and in other parts of the world. It also reminds us that it's our responsibility to try to alleviate their hunger, therefore providing these children with a brighter future. Please join me to watch See Our Future.
Dear Emily, when I was growing up, life was quite a struggle. There were times where we could not afford much. But no matter how difficult things got, your grandma would always make sacrifices to give me the best she can afford. At that time, I didn't understand what kept her going despite her struggles. But now, I do. A promise. Love, Mom.
Well, let's proceed with our webinar by introducing the second speaker, Dr. Christophe Casaban. And once again, I'll ask your permission to read his resume. Well, Dr. Christophe Casaban is a French veterinarian graduated from the Veterinary University of Lyon in 1993. And he has been working in the poultry sector, and more specifically with poultry biologicals, for over 25 years. He joined Ceva Animal in France in 2002, and his remarkable knowledge comes from a wide range of experiences while working as quality control, regulatory affairs, and R&D for poultry biologicals, as well as international technical manager and global veterinary services manager for poultry vaccines. Today, Dr. Casaban is Ceva's global scientific director, and in his presentation, he will share with us some important information on disease prevention. Let's give the floor to Dr. Casaban, shall we?
Thank you for the kind introduction. A very good afternoon to all of you, coming from so many different Asian countries. Thank you for attending this webinar. I hope first that all of you are safe and healthy. Business-wise, obviously, it's a different story since all of us are heavily challenged in these difficult times. I'd like first to acknowledge the previous talk given by Mr. Justin Sherrod from Rabobank, which was extremely clear, detailed, and informative about what's going on and what to expect in the near future. So before getting started, let me stress a few points. What we have seen in all countries at the beginning of this COVID-19 crisis was this type of picture where we saw consumers rushing to the supermarkets, retailers, just to buy some food to make stocks of foods. And even though it's a kind of challenging times, I'd like to draw some positive points from these times. As you can see from this picture, shortage of table eggs, which was experienced in many countries around the world. And for me, this is at least a very strong evidence of trust of the consumers towards poultry products, that they consider meat and table eggs as a safe, healthy, and affordable source of proteins. So just to sum up, what are the main issues or the main challenges we are facing today with this crisis? I could very simply summarize them into the following. We are observing a very strong volatility in prices of both chicken meat and table eggs. Obviously, all the supply chain is under very tight pressure. And finally, we are still experiencing a lot of personal and business uncertainties over the future. So in this context, I will try to briefly explain you how a company like Ceva Animal Health can help you, can be a partner to you to overcome this crisis as much as possible and as quickly as possible. Just few points as an introduction. As you know, all the forecasts are planning an increasing world population by 2050, which is gonna reach 10 billion people. So this is just in 30 years' time. So it's almost tomorrow. And to feed this growing population, the overall production will need to increase by 60%. And we know that the arable land is not infinite. So basically we'll have to produce more with less. Another important feature is that we still have about 10-11% of world population which is suffering from malnourishment, whereas more or less a similar proportion is suffering from obesity or excess weight. Final figure, because of this growing population, and I would say also growing middle class population, most of these coming efforts and additional supply of proteins will have to occur in the two main emerging areas, namely Southeast Asia and Africa. So what we would like to propose you is to partner with you to help you delivering more value from your business. And I would like to split my talk into three different tracks. One of them is to work on efficiency. The other one is to keep on keeping quality as a main goal. And finally, proposing you some tracks for peace of mind for you and for your staff. So few examples on how we can help you to optimize your efficiency in production. The first area of work is to optimize vaccination protocols. I mean by that, simplifying them, putting them at the same and the right place. This is a survey that we have done over 18 months ago in about 1,300 hatcheries around the world. And this survey looked for the type of vaccination equipment that was in place in these different hatcheries. And as you can see in this chart, about 30% were equipped with Innovo already, and 55% with subcutaneous equipment, and the rest was dealing with spray vaccination only. So you can see at this stage already that the vast majority of hatcheries around the world are already equipped either with semi-automated or fully automated vaccination equipment. So that's definitely a very strong signal that everywhere around the world, there is a massive trend towards moving as many vaccinations as possible to the hatchery for obvious reasons. Simplifying the vaccination protocols, getting rid of the uncertainty of the farm vaccination, unevenness, and in the hatchery, we can get access now to automated equipment, and we are dealing with limited staff that we can regularly train, coach, and audit as well. Interestingly, if we focus on the 6 top global players of the poultry industry, which account for about nearly 200 hatcheries, you can see that this proportion of Innovo and subcutaneous equipment is becoming very, very dominant, with 95+% of these companies equipped with one of these two systems. I'd like also to stress at this stage that our teams are providing you a unique support service named CHIC program, exactly to train your staff in the hatchery to do a good job in preparing the vaccine, handling the equipment, maintaining the equipment properly. And this service is the only one which has received the quality recognition by a third party, which is Bureau Veritas, and we are the only ones on the market to have received this quality recognition from Bureau Veritas. Another area for maximizing efficiency is to work obviously on the return on investment, and I guess that in this current situation, it's of paramount importance, of course. Just a few examples to illustrate my talk. Coming from Malaysia, in an area which was suffering from a very heavy Newcastle challenge of genotype 7. You see an area made of about 25 million broilers constantly in the same place. And they were split into two different groups, let's say. One group was vaccinated using Ceva innovative vector vaccine, Vectomin ND, together with a couple of live vaccines, whereas the other group was vaccinated with genotype 7 live and killed vaccines. And as you can see from these different charts in terms of production performances, the orange bars are the ones of the group receiving Vectomin ND. They show the very clear performance improvements in terms of mortality rate. It's very clear. Final weight was nearly the same. Feed conversion ratio was tremendously improved, and ultimately performance index as well. So when we turn this into figures, into money, it was about 100 euros plus per 1,000 birds. Why is it like that? Just simply that because genotype 7 live and kill vaccines, they are still made of the so-called classical approach, which is using live and kill. So they are still suffering from a very high interference with maternal antibodies, whereas Vectomin ND, being of Marek technology, does not. Another example, in this case, on another disease, still from Malaysia, from another area under very heavy challenge and risk of both Newcastle disease genotype 7 as well as very virulent Gumboro. And in this case, we proposed using our immune complex, Transmune, in the hatchery to help the company to displace and eventually replace this field virus. You can see these are the results from the PCR that we from the bursas that we collected, and the purple bars are showing the progressive arrival of the vaccine strain at the expense of the field strain from these bursas. In this case, it took a while because the environment was heavily loaded by field virus, but as you can see, after a while, the vaccine virus is actually able to replace the field virus because it's getting into the bursa, is occupying the bursa, and is ultimately able to stop the Gumboro cycle. And we also got the feedback from the customer itself in terms of profits. And as you can see, already from the third cycle, and even more already from the second cycle, sorry, and even more from the third cycle, he could report massive return on investment directly in Malaysian ringgits, thanks to the improvements in mortality and culls. This table is summarizing some of our main reports from the field, as you can see, from many different countries, different epidemiological conditions, comparing Transmune to different vaccination programs. At the bottom, you've got a few Asian countries. And as you can see, a very consistent, strong return on investment, which is in the range of 10 to 100 euros per 1,000 birds. Second area of activity, of progress, of working together is working on the quality of the final product. In other words, to meet the consumer's expectations. And we know that one of these expectations is definitely to reduce antibiotic usage. So I'm gonna give you a few examples on how we can help you to address this expectation. This is an independent paper from a university scientist, which clearly states that no way to produce antibiotic-free chickens if first we did not address properly the immunosuppressive diseases. And they take the example of Gumboro disease. And in this case, it was just subclinical manifestation of the disease, but because of the produced immunosuppression, these birds were still highly susceptible just to E. coli. So first, we need to address and to prevent in a very robust way and reliable way the challenge of Gumboro disease in order to reduce the risk of facing these secondary opportunistic bacterial infections. As an evidence, this is a comparison of flocks receiving Transmune or vaccinated in the field by 2 applications of intermediate vaccines. And as you can see, the application in the hatchery with an immune complex vaccine is much more reliable, much more secure, much safer in terms of final outcome in performances on the left-hand side, as well as in terms of E. coli superinfections, as you can see on the right-hand side. And here again, massive return on investment, which was about 48 euros per 1,000 birds. That's another example by taking the example of bronchitis. The first 2 bars are showing the average of antibiotic expenses per 1,000 chickens when a company was using only Massachusetts type vaccines. So we were between $9 and $14 per 1,000 birds. Most probably because this company was facing some variant bronchitis challenge. So these birds were not properly protected. So they were subjected to secondary opportunistic bacterial infections. And as you can see in the bottom of this chart, once we were able to introduce the relevant variant vaccine in this market and applying it properly by proper equipment, proper teams, together with the mass vaccines, we could properly tackle this bronchitis challenge, including the variant one. As a result, there was a completely stop of antibiotic usage in this company. So there's a massive drop from $8 to $14 to 0 in this case. Another very strong consumer expectation is to get safe products as well as products that comply with some welfare concerns. And in this area, we can also work with you by proposing what we are calling less is more. What is it about? I will take the example of the pullet vaccination program, which is usually very busy, very crowded, you see, with plenty of vaccinations all around the rearing period, with spray, with injections, with drinking water, with fowlpox vaccination. So there are plenty of handlings. So what we are proposing you is that with some innovative products, we can reduce massively this amount of handlings by nearly 50%. How? By applying vector vaccines that can combine several diseases in one single application. Just think about pox, laryngotracheitis, encephalomyelitis that can be mixed with chicken anemia. You've got 4 diseases that are addressed in one single pox scarification. The same applies to HVT vector vaccines with HVT ND, whereby applying Vectormin ND, you are addressing Marek's disease with HVT part, as well as Newcastle. And this technology also enables you to reduce the amount of live vaccines to be applied in the field. Last example, by using combo vaccines like Corimune that are including Coryza, Salmonella, and as far as Corimune 7 is concerned, it also includes Newcastle bronchitis and EDS. So by this way, you have 2 vaccinations instead of 5 vaccinations, namely Coryza 2 shots, Salmonella 2 shots, and NDIB EDSK 1 shot. So that's a massive improvement. And ultimately, by using this updated, improved program incorporating vector vaccines, combo vaccines, we are getting less handlings of the birds, which means basically less stress to the birds. I would say easier, simpler program for you by ensuring much safer options and extremely efficacious options as well. And the same applies to broader vaccination programs, of course. Final area where we can work together is to propose you a kind of peace of mind. What I mean by that is that basically, let's think about your vaccination program once for all, decide what to implement, and then forget about it because it's going to run on its own, thanks to strong products, reliable products, as well as reliable and secure supporting services, either in the hatchery with chick program or in the field with GPS. As an example, that's a survey of 4 years of usage of Transmune in the field, different companies, different conditions. And as you can see on the left-hand side, when we collect the bursas from these vaccinated chickens, you've got nearly 90% of them which display, as expected, the presence of the vaccine virus into the bursas, as expected, as promised. It's totally different when we are dealing with the old-fashioned drinking water vaccination program, where nearly half only of the bursa samples were displaying the vaccine virus. And as you can see, the other samples were either negative or displaying a field virus, clearly showing uncertainty, a lot of failures of vaccination. And the last group was getting the vector vaccine for Gumboro, so HVT-VP2. And as you can see, even though it's an innovative technology too, it's insufficient to protect the bursa against the field virus. It's unable to block the Gumboro cycle, just because the bursa is left open, is left free from being colonized by any field virus. So ultimately, you are getting only an incomplete level of protection. This can be illustrated as well by endpoint serology. As you can see here, in the Transmune flocks, they got a very consistent antibody response. In the drinking water vaccinated flocks, it was a little bit more uneven, especially with negative flocks, clearly showing a lack of vaccine take. And on the right-hand side, in the flocks receiving HVT-VP2, I remind you that we should not detect any antibody response by applying a conventional ELISA. So all of these bars are simply showing a field infection that elicited these detectable ELISA antibodies. So again, an incomplete protection. Final area is to work on respiratory health by thinking about the very final point of the line, which is to streamline the processing plant procedures. We are working more and more with the processing plants, and we discovered first that simply the data on arrivals is an area where we can help you to improve your figures. In this field experience, we improved the amount of dead on arrivals only by 0.4% reduction. And this enabled immediately to pay back for the bronchitis vaccine that was used. And again, thanks to a better control of infectious bronchitis, we should ultimately help improving the overall respiratory health. Another very important area is the speed of the line in the processing plant. And whenever these carcasses are displaying some lesions in the respiratory tract, like air sacculitis, then it's a mess, because you have to slow down the line to remove these carcasses for extra inspection and sorting out. And this is costing as well a lot of money. So just by reducing the rate of air circulation, we are immediately able to turn it into increased profits at the end. So just to conclude my talk, I try to explain you how we can help you maximizing your efficiency of production, constantly improving the quality towards the end user, towards the consumer, as well as proposing you a couple of peace of mind tracks for you to be able to focus on what really matters for your business. And I would like to finish my talk by using this quote in Mandarin, Wei Ji. Sorry for my poor pronunciation, but that's the way to say crisis. And as you can see, it's made of two different parts. One of them, which means danger. So that's probably what we are experiencing nowadays. But the other one is also meaning opportunity. So that's something that I would like all of us we keep in mind for the future. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Casaban, for this interesting presentation. And I was glad to see that you touched some important points for us here in Asia, such as improvement of performance, reduction of antibiotics, and even animal welfare. Well, now as we get prepared to answer your questions during this Q&A session, I would like to invite you to watch a nice movie about one of the key services that Ceva offers to its customers, the well-known CHIP program. Are you ready? Yes, so let's watch it together. I have seen this movie, this chick problem movie, several times, but I always feel a little bit emotional because the work, the commitment of these guys that goes every day to your hatcheries to make sure the vaccines are properly applied. Really, this is one of the cornerstone of the success of Ceva's offer to you. Well, now we have to proceed with the Q&A session, and I have received some of them here, and I will start with Justin. I can see him. Just, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Okay,
Oh,
Marcelo.
okay. I will start with you. The first question was, well, what might be the Indian poultry scenario during the rest of 2020? India is really facing difficult times today, as you may know. What would be your perspective for that market for the end of the year?
Sure. Look, if we were anywhere else, and I said that prices had doubled, broiler prices had doubled over the last month, you'd be thinking, that's great news. But actually, that isn't great news in India because prices were down so much in the first few months of this year. So we have a situation where prices were down very strongly, but we are seeing them improve. We're seeing them improve largely because consumer sentiment has changed. And I think that's good news. It's not a guarantee that the consumer sentiment will stay strong. The initial impact on prices was due to rumours, incorrect rumours, poor rumours about a connection between chicken consumption and coronavirus. We've since had a subsequent impact on demand, which has come from the lockdown measures taken in India as well. All the same, we think by the end of Q2, we'll start to see demand and production ramping up again. And we're reasonably optimistic about feed prices as well. We see them remaining at reasonable levels through the balance of the year. So an improving scenario out till the end of the year, but still a lot of uncertainty in this current quarter about how India will come out of what is quite a strong set of lockdown conditions. And in particular, that informal market through which a lot of chicken is actually consumed, how quickly will that bounce back? How quickly will it be allowed to bounce back? So these are the main considerations, Marcelo.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let me turn to Christoph. Christoph, I've got one question here for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfectly. IVD intermediate or IVD intermediate plus vaccine? Which one is the best for Southeast Asian countries, especially Bangladesh?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. As you know, most of the Southeast Asian countries, and including Bangladesh, of course, are facing a very virulent form of Gumboro disease, and this is regularly confirmed by the surveys that we are running very regularly. So I would say first, please pay attention to biosecurity, improvement in biosecurity to reduce the load of virus into the environment as much as you can. And it includes applying careful cleaning and disinfection procedures, as well as downtime periods in between. I'm insisting on that because that's of paramount importance if we want to succeed in the vaccination program. So as far as vaccines are considered, no doubt I would recommend to use intermediate plus vaccines because they are working much faster. And as you know, we are in a race against the field virus, so we have no time to wait for the intermediate vaccine to take off. So we have definitely to go for intermediate plus. But I would like to stress again what I mentioned, that to secure the vaccination protocols, to vaccination efficiency, if possible, please consider bringing the vaccination to the hatchery, or at least a day old upon arrival in the field, by using transmucosal immune complex. This will ensure you a very long-lasting, sustainable batch after batch consistency of success. Whereas applying drinking water vaccination is always facing some uncertainties of failures just because of water quality, poor thirstiness of the birds. So there are still a lot of failures that we can face in the field. So I would definitely advise hatchery or day-old vaccination with transmune to cope with this issue.
Okay, thank you, Christophe. Now back to Justin. It's a very similar question that you mentioned to India, but now I will extend it. How will be the COVID-19 impact on the Asian poultry market?
Okay. Let's break Asia down into a few different markets where things are happening differently. The first group of countries I'd put together, Marcelo, are China, Vietnam, and the Philippines, where we have a strong impact of African swine fever on pork production, pork availability. In these countries, we expect poultry production to be up on last year levels. In China, we expect it to be up quite strongly, somewhere between 5-10% this year. Vietnam, probably closer to 4 or 5% or something like that. So we see in these particular markets, because of the impacts of African swine fever, quite strong growth. Now, in other parts of Asia, and if I look in Southeast Asia, I'd say here we've got a group of countries where we have local impacts on consumption are going to be quite challenging. I talk about the collapse in informal chicken consumption through food service in recent months, and that will continue for the next couple of at least weeks, if not months. And we also see in these countries an ongoing challenge with demand through the balance of this year due to lower tourism. Think particularly of Thailand here, which is going to be affected in that way. So here we see demand coming down, production coming down right across the board, somewhere between, say, 2 to 5% or something like that year on year in terms of the reduction of production associated with local consumption. In Thailand, the situation is even more complicated because Thailand is also being challenged with exports at the moment. Now, on the one hand, the changes in currencies should be good for exports, but on the other hand, the change in currencies also impact the cost of feed, and we see some other dynamics in export markets. For Thailand, exporting to Europe, for example, is becoming more challenging. And so we need to deal with, or Thailand will need to face lower, reduced access there. Thailand also would have expected quite some exports over the coming months to Japan in the lead up to the Olympics, which were going to be held in Japan, August, September sort of time. So that's also disappeared from the system. So in Thailand, we also have some challenges there associated with a lack of export opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Justin. Christophe, back to you.
Yes.
Again, about IBD vaccine, but this time for pullets, layer pullets, I mean. Which IBD vaccines are you advising for layer pullets?
Okay, thank you. So I've got a good news. We are currently in the process of launching a very innovative vaccine, Gumboro vaccine for pullets. His name is Novamune. This is an immune complex vaccine that is specifically designed for pullets, slow-growing birds, native chickens, this type of population, which is totally different in terms of biology compared to broilers. So that's why we specifically designed for Gumboro disease in this type of population of birds. And we've got already very, very promising field experience in some Asian countries. I'm thinking about the Philippines in particular. And we are definitely under a launching phase all around the world, including in Europe, in all parts of the world.
Okay, thank you, Christophe. Now, Justin, back to you. Okay?
Sure.
And this is a very interesting question. It seems that live market countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, they are suffering more as compared to processing market countries. Within this context, what should producers do from these countries, from live processing countries, to deal with this situation?
Yeah. There's no easy answers there, Marcelo, unfortunately, because we're in such a dynamic situation to really think through what the opportunities are for producers in those markets. You need to form a view on where you think the market is heading over the balance of this year and into next year. When I take a step back like that, the one thing that is clear to me is that integrated supply chains will continue to do relatively better than informal supply chains. So those that are linked into processing, for example, will tend to do better. Those that are linked back into feed will tend to do better as well. So in general, this seems to be a pattern which is leading to better performance at the moment. But so much of what actually happens for those who are focused on live markets will depend on the restrictions that governments continue to place around the operation of those markets, how quickly those restrictions are lifted, and what that lifting of restrictions means to the return of demand. I don't want to be too negative or too positive here. I want to try and be realistic and say that I think this is a period of months that we're talking about, not weeks, before those live markets really get back to what we might consider to be normal for this time of year. I think if anyone is focused only on live markets, then they should prepare for a period, an extended period of lower demand. Unfortunately.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Justin. Christophe, back to you. Will CHIC program be covering farm vaccination as well as on top of hatchery vaccination?
No, CHIC program is specifically designed for hatchery vaccination service. As I mentioned, it includes spray, deod injection, and Innovo. For farm and farm service, farm support, we have another type of offer which is called GPS, which stands for Global Protection Services, and this includes obviously helping you addressing farm vaccination in the best way, as well as assessing by serology sampling, by organ sampling for PCR, either a proper vaccine take, flock immunization, as well as any diagnosis or troubleshooting issues you may face. So we have basically two main programs to support you: CHIC program in the hatchery and GPS for the farm.
Okay, that's very clear, Christophe. Now, Ruud, there's one question for you. Actually, it's a good question, but I didn't know to whom I should refer. So I'm sending this to you. In this time of this question comes from the Philippines. Can Ceva assist their partners here in the Philippines in extending a lower cost vaccines using the perfect pair now that we are facing problems related to COVID-19? Or if I may rephrase this, how Ceva could help the partners in the Philippines, not only in the Philippines, but in the whole Asia?
Marcelo, I can also address that question to you as you're the head of the poultry franchise in Asia. But of course, we are doing everything we can to help our producers. I think the most important one is to make sure that our products are available, our people are there, our VSE engineers are there to serve the people in the field and the people using our vaccines. I think that's probably the best way we can help our producers to continue their business continuity at this particular time that is very difficult for our customers to produce chickens. And I think that's the kind of service that we are focusing on.
Yes, I agree with you, Ruud. And there is not a simple answer for that, I know. But the way we have to do this to keep being close to our customers in this very difficult situation. And this is one of the ways we found to do it, by running this webinar and going and supplying vaccines, right? So let me go back to Justin. And this is again about the impact of COVID, but from a different angle. What is the impact of COVID-19 on the Asian exports in the semester 2? most likely from Thailand, of course.
Yeah. Thanks, Marcelo. Again, not an easy question to answer. I'm actually not very positive about the situation with Thailand's exports. I think that we've got these problems with access to Europe. Part of this is tied up with the Brexit situation and how that gets negotiated and how quota gets redistributed between the EU 27 and the UK. So there's that part. The Olympics part is kind of pretty much done for the second half of this year, given the timing of the Olympics, etc. So that's really an impact right now and will be less of an impact there. China is still going to keep importing as well, and so that's a little bit of good news for Thailand. But overall, I think that exports are going to be down. China up a little bit on last year, perhaps, but Europe probably down. Brazil is kind of a part of the equation here as well, with Brazil having quite a strong first part of the year, but now COVID-19 is catching up there, and you've got quite strong currency movements as well, which is helping Brazil to be very competitive in export markets. And at the same time, you've got some changes in domestic demand in Brazil as well, changes in production capacity. So all of these dynamics, there is just so much at play at the moment, Marcelo. It's not easy to provide a simple answer, unfortunately, on what will happen with one or other particular country in terms of trade in the second half of this year.
Yes, I understand there is not a simple answer to that. Now, back to Christoph. Christoph, another question about IBD. If IBD titers are high and CV is higher, like 50 to 6% of day of age, in high challenge areas, what should be the vaccination program for layers and pullets? You mentioned this before, but just to reinforce your answer, please.
Okay. So again, it will depend on your program locally and what's available for you. Let's say the traditional vaccination program is using a couple of intermediate live vaccines, intermediate plus live vaccines in the field, and our general recommendation is to apply it twice, just to cope with this heterogeneity of the old chick titers, as well as the heterogeneity of the decline of maternal antibodies in these birds. So would suggest two applications somewhere between 18 and 24 days of age, something like that. Drinking water, again, by keeping a very close eye on the procedure of water withdrawal, of neutralizing the remaining chlorine in the water line. So there are a lot of procedures, and we can help you, of course, to do your best in this approach. Otherwise, the coming and it's already there. The coming alternative will be to use Novammune one shot only right from the hatchery, and this is totally compatible with Marek vaccines, with Vectormune ND, with Vectormune AI. So it's very safe, very convenient. So we do hope that this is going to be the very good option for the future.
Okay, Christoph, thank you. Now a question coming specifically for Mr. Ruud. Mr. Ruud, how would be the supply of vaccines to Asian producers? You touched that we have to keep it, but what we are actually doing to guarantee that they are going to receive these vaccines?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm happy to report that we continue to have good inventories in place. Our production is going on in Europe, where we have a big supply center, and also in the United States. So we continue to be able to produce, and we continue to be able to ship our vaccines to all the countries in Asia and around the world. So that is ongoing, and we are finding solutions. Sometimes we have some local transportation issues in certain countries because of COVID-19 blockages, but we have so far been able to resolve most of the issues in the countries. So despite the challenges around the world, our production and supply chain is able to continue to supply. And our inventory levels in Asia are generally very good. We have advanced our shipments to the countries to make sure that our inventories in Asia are higher than normal. So that means your business continuity is taken into account. And like I said, so we are able to serve your needs for the months to come.
Well, that's great. Now, another question to Justin. And Justin, how do you see the supply and, of course, prices of feed ingredients, specifically corn and soya meal, from major growers such as Brazil, Argentina, and USA?
Yeah. Marcelo, the main issue right now is, of course, energy prices, and this is dragging down the G&O complex for a couple of reasons. One is because of the nature of trade and who participates in those markets and linkages between markets from a sort of financial trader point of view. People exit oil and they exit ags as well, so we've seen prices move around because of that. And then there's also, the low price of oil is also influencing the use of corn in ethanol, for example. So, we've got lower demand, lower cost, and we've also, that lower demand for transportation flows through to lower demand for ethanol as well. So actually, on balance, I'd say from where we are today, we probably see most of the feed ingredients going sideways over the coming months. We don't really see a lot of upward or downward change from levels that we see today. And so those levels are quite favorable, I think. So I think the main issue becomes what's going to happen with trade. And there are two elements to determine that. One is currency and the differences in currency. Obviously, the US dollar is quite strong at the moment. The Brazilian real, the Argentine peso is quite soft at the moment. So that tells you a little bit about where origins are going to come from. But the other issue is actually the changes in trade flows driven by changes in shipping frequencies, ship movements. We've already seen, for example, shipments generally between North America and Asia down by about 10% on what we would normally expect in terms of boat movements. Now, I know these commodities tend to go in different boats, and I'm talking about general shipping movements here and merchandise trade, but we have to see that there's this general reduction in global trade. I presented a chart showing that the World Trade Organization sees trade down by somewhere between 13 and 32% this year. That's going to add cost into trade, and it's going to add timing issues as well into trade. So that's another consideration, the trade consideration. Currency, what happens with ship movements and the cost of trade on the one hand, but generally the global prices, I think, are going to be reasonably stable for the coming months.
Yes, thank you, Justin. I have received many questions here, and it's really difficult for me to select them. But there is one that might get the input of the three of you on this. Very interesting, and not specifically addressed in this seminar today, but in the slaughter process, in the poultry slaughter process, do you have any idea about social distance that have to be kept, or how this social distance in the slaughter plants will affect the output?
We're going to see a reduction in slaughter capacity. We already see that around the world. We're talking maybe something around 10% or something like that, which is due to changes in line speeds and changes to the way that workers operate along those lines. So I think we will see an impact there at the moment. Roughly, rule of thumb, it's about 10% or something like that. But worker absences are a big part of that in terms of how we see that. And that's kind of different to social distancing, although obviously everything is related. So there will be a marginal decline in slaughter capacity as a result of instituting safe working practices within plants.
Yes, Christophe, you want to add anything? Ruth?
Yes, just one more comment. Obviously, that's a major issue because, as we know, number of workforce is absolutely critical in processing plants. So applying social distance of 1 meter or 1.5 meters is just cannot be an option, I would say. So what we have seen in a couple of places is perhaps a kind of reinforcement in personal protective equipment with some helmets, this kind of additional protection. I'm also happy to share with you that there have been a couple of initiatives of supplying hydroalcoholic gel to our customers. This is what we committed, for instance, from some of our manufacturing plants. We could help at least in this limited activity. So yeah, there are a couple of initiatives about that.
Okay, Ruud?
Yeah, maybe not so much on the plan, but I think also the hatchery is a place where people work in close proximity together, which is very much also the focus of where we interact with our customers. And I think it's important to keep the hatcheries going, organize working processes as good as possible. Our engineers, as I mentioned before, are still able in most countries to go to the hatcheries and to service the needs of our clients. So, and also there we take all the precautions into account using the proper procedures and PPE in order to be able to serve those hatcheries and to make sure that the hatcheries continue to work as good as they can, because it's a crucial element of poultry production.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have several questions and we don't have time to address all of them. I may have to choose 2 or 3 here. And one that seems very interesting to me, Justin, is that do you feel that this crisis of COVID-19 will affect the importation of GP flocks or PS flocks, therefore extending this crisis here in Asia?
Marcelo, could you repeat the question? My line dropped out for a second.
Okay, yeah. Do you feel that this crisis of COVID-19 could affect the importation of GP flocks or parent stock, therefore extending the crisis that we are facing here?
Yes, and yes. This is back to the trade issue that I just mentioned in terms of feed grains. Obviously, we're talking about a different dimension of trade here. We're talking about air freight rather than sea freight. But we also have reductions in freight availability. Therefore, we see increases in cost of shipments. So anything depending on air freight is going to be affected here. And this is something that depends on air freight generally in terms of things being brought into the region. But even within the region, we're then also dependent on sea freight for the movement of chicks, the movement of parent stock, the movement of GPS around also. So I think we're adding some cost, we're adding some time, we're reducing efficiency of all of these things, and at the margin, it's going to affect all of us. At the margin, it sort of brings that kind of the uncertainty, brings a hesitation about investing. It spaces out investment decisions that we have to make as well. It adds cost on the side, and really, it's unfortunate, but it's somewhat inevitable. Actually, if I think about some of the positives in the current situation and the outlook for the rest of this year and into 2021 for poultry, I would sort of talk about the cost of production advantage for poultry being a real benefit. And so to see these various factors which are adding cost onto poultry production is very unfortunate. However, that is the current world that we're living in. And in the case of air freight, I really don't see any improvement at a big scale quickly, although I know that air freight is trying to be balanced out and trying to find ways to continue to service paying customers.
Well, thank you. I have another question here, and this is for you, Christophe. And very interesting question, and please answer that. Is there any cross-reactivity between avian coronavirus, the IB virus, and the COVID-19 in terms of serological response in humans?
Okay, so we have to know that these two viruses belong to two different groups, even though they are coronaviruses. But this is a very huge, a very large group of viruses, and infectious bronchitis belongs to the group which is called the gamma coronaviruses, whereas COVID-19 belongs to the group called beta coronaviruses. So different Greek letters, gamma versus beta. So actually they are totally different, and there is no any cross reactivity whatsoever between them.
Okay, very clear, very clear. And now I'm going to ask the last question, and I will ask the three of you to give your inputs on that. And I found it very interesting. How the poultry industry can use COVID-19 as an advantage, of course, as compared to other needs. Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start. I'll let the others build on that. I just mentioned, Marcelo, that I think poultry's cost of production advantage is going to be a positive thing as we go through this difficult period of much lower economic growth, much more uncertainty in the economy, and lower consumer confidence and business confidence. So maintaining that cost of production advantage is a real benefit for poultry, and we should see some increased consideration on the consumption side as a result of that. So that's the first thing I'd mention. The second thing I'd mention is that we have to think about biosecurity and food safety again and again and again. We need to make sure that the sort of thing that we saw happen in India earlier this year does not happen anywhere else. The sorts of, and I've talked there about rumours being spread about the connection between poultry consumption and carrying of diseases. We need, as a whole industry, and everyone on this webinar is part of this, to keep pushing the case about the care, the level of detail, and the attention on a daily, hourly basis to biosecurity and food safety in terms of everything that we do in keeping the people working within our industry safe, looking after the animals, and keeping consumers safe. So pressing the case around biosecurity and food safety, I think, is something that should become a benefit here, with longer lasting benefits than the crisis that we're currently in. The third thing I'd say is that just as we today are here on a webinar, meeting each other virtually, not necessarily seeing each other in the way that we might have if we had met face to face, we all need to get used to a bit better used to the virtual world. We need to embrace digitization in different ways. We need to think about how we can get advice into our operations online rather than through physical visits. We need to share information online rather than through physical exchanges. We need to look at automation of different steps in the process that we have at the moment and embrace opportunities there, because obviously worker absences has been one of the issues affecting poultry production everywhere around the world. And we need to be thinking online in terms of what we produce and how we market that to consumers as well, because we've seen big increases in online food retail sales, and I think that they will continue on for the coming years. So there's three things that I think could be benefits that come out of coronavirus for the poultry industry.
Yeah, if I can go second, I think this very comprehensive answer from Justin. Not too much to add, but of course, what especially for Asia, of course, the market for poultry depends on a very large extent to restaurants, hotels, etc. That market will be constrained for quite a while. Tourism will be down for quite a while because of flight restrictions. So that means that very quickly the producers need to find the ways to the retail sector. So that means that the online market, as Justin already alluded upon, for marketing, but also for supplying poultry products to the end user. So the retail need to be fully embraced with all in all its broadness, with all the opportunities that there are in order to bring poultry meat to the consumer, be creative in marketing, and of course also in several ways of preparing poultry meat to the table of the final consumer. I think these are and I think the poultry producers that are the quickest in making this turnaround will be the most successful ones.
Yeah, Christophe,
Maybe just
do you want
a few, final point from me. Of course, totally agree with what has been mentioned so far, and I would like to perhaps to insist on the I would say the good image of poultry products towards the end user, towards the consumer, and we have probably to capitalize on that. Either meat or table eggs are regarded massively as a very healthy and affordable source of protein. So that's already a very strong asset that we are enjoying compared to other source of proteins. Cost of production was mentioned as well as one of the lowest one. I may add the low carbon footprint as well within the other source of proteins. And as both Justin and Ruud mentioned, I also took notes of probable thinking of new ways of marketing, including online purchasing and home delivery, this kind of activity that will definitely expand, at least in the near future, until the hotels, the restaurants are eventually able to catch up in the second stage.
Well, unfortunately, we need to come to an end in this webinar, right? I know that the speakers could not answer to all of your questions, but we are going to make sure that you receive the answers in your emails. I could not finish this broadcast without thanking our speakers. For me to express my gratitude to you, Christophe, to you, Justin, to you, Ruud. Without you, this webinar wouldn't be possible, right? But I also need to mention the people that work 24 hours behind the scene to make this webinar possible. I will just mention a few. Please, Janice Lai, please, Van Martin, Christel, the magician, as I call him, he's the IT brain behind of all of this, and Jermaine Khan and all the guys into Malaysia. Without your help, without your hard work, this webinar wouldn't be possible. But most importantly, guys, most important to me is I have to say thank you for giving us the privilege of having your attention, the honor of having your time. And I have received here the number of countries that are watching us now live, and I would like to send a big thanks to Indonesia, to Malaysia, the country that I call home. Thank you to you from Thailand, from Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, the beautiful island Sri Lanka, from China, from the Philippines, from Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. And there are some other countries from Europe as well. So big thanks to you guys. But now I have just one last request. Please help us to improve this webinar just by answering to the survey form that we are going to see in this page. Click there, just answer. It's going to take 2 minutes and it's going to help us a lot. Once again, thanks a lot. Keep safe, keep healthy, and see you again soon. Either here in another webinar or face-to-face. That is much better, right? Thank you and bye.
Thank you.